So everybody often asks me what it's like to start a podcast, what it's like to do one about your life, and all of that wonderful stuff. And today I am joined by my executive producer, but he's also the host uh, from Orbit Media. Steve Fishman is joining me. He was the co-creator or creator or my partner in crime on our latest podcast from Orbit Media, Finding Mom's Killer, which you can find on Sony. It dropped on Monday. And Mover Nation, I've wanted to talk about this all week, but I have had the flu. I'm finally feeling good, though. 10 days in, finally getting back to myself. But I'm so glad to see all of you. On that note, I'm Collier Landry. Let's get into it.
Testimony continued today in the most notorious criminal trial in which Dr. John Boyle is accused of killing his wife, Maureen.
The boy confidently told the jury it was his decision to testify against his father.
I heard a scream. I heard a thud. It's about this loud.
We, the jury, find the defendant guilty.
I decided at an early age that our trauma should not be what defines us. It's what we choose to do with it that does. I'm here to share my unique perspective on true crime, mental health, society, and popular culture, and always with a slight sense of humor. I'm Collier Landry, and welcome to my show.
Live from Santa Monica, California, wherever you may be and however you may be watching or listening, thanks for making me a part of your day. Mover Nation, what's going on? What's going on? What's going on? All right, guys, thank you so much for being here. I greatly appreciate you. I think I don't have my proper sound settings turned on. Of course I don't. Because why? I'm out of practice, guys. It's been a minute. As you know, it's been a minute. So I'm a little out of practice. Come on, there we go. That's the settings I need. What's going on? What's going on? I'll tell you what's going on. It's good to actually hear myself. I had the flu, and I had I was coughing and all this stuff, and I said to my friends, I was like, it sounds like I've become like a 2 or 3 pack a day smoker, because I was like, hey guys, how are you? No offense to anyone who smokes. I don't recommend it, but yeah. Couple of packs a day is what it felt like. My lungs, everything. I don't know. I haven't been down like this in quite a while, and it knocked me for 6. Not gonna lie. If you hear somebody whining next to me, of course that is everyone's favorite little Chihuahua in the world, little Miss Marisol, who was also very. She was not pleased with my being sick, because of course that meant that she didn't get to go outside as much, even though she did. But let me put her on camera. Little Marisol, welcome. I know, sweetheart. And we have for you, well, not only do we have your ducky, which was gifted to us in our birthday presents that we opened last week, but we also have, of course, bully sticks in the bully stick holder. But I'm going to give it to her without the holder for the moment, while we get into the show. So, as I said, I have Steve Fishman joining me today from Orbit Media. He is the creator, executive producer, host of Finding Mom's Killer, which is on Sony, which came out this last week. Marisol, come here. Let me put you on camera. Which came out this week. And if you guys haven't checked it out yet, you should. They did a fantastic job. And we're going to talk about like how we made the program. We're going to talk about how it came to be. As I told you guys last week, Steve had come on the podcast to discuss another podcast that he was doing that he had just released, called The Burden, which was a journalistic piece, which about, I believe, four years in the making, about a corrupt cop named Louis Scarcella. A few of you were familiar with his activities in New York in the 80s, 70s, 80s, and I guess 90s. And he was a disgraced detective, and they did a fantastic job with that over at Orbit. And then we got into my story, and here we are. I'm going to play the trailer for you guys. We got dinged. We're trying to work out the copyright issues with YouTube, but I'm just going to play it anyways, so you guys can check it out, as long as I can find it. That is, there we go. I'm going to play this for you guys just to update you. If you haven't checked it out, it's part of Sony's The Binge. You get the first episode for free. You subscribe, you get the rest of the episodes. It's a 6-part series. And here's the trailer.
Boyle was lying awake at night when he heard something horrible. 2 bangs and a scream.
What was going through your mind at that time? What were you thinking?
Where's my mother?
Collier was just 12 when his mother went missing.
She would never, ever leave her children, ever.
Collier wanted answers. His best hope? To team up with a middle-aged detective with a chip on his shoulder.
Well, I got a partner now. Somebody who's going to help me find out what happened to my mother. Me and Dave.
This is the story of the most unlikely detective duo the world has ever seen, and the shocking crime they solved.
It was almost like I was in the middle of a made-for-TV movie because it was so bizarre.
Ernie said, well, Mommy took a little vacation, Collier.
His whole life's a lie.
What if the call was coming from inside the house? From Sony Music Entertainment and Orbit Media, this is Finding Mom's Killer. Coming March 1st to The Binge. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
There you go. Riveting stuff from Orbit Media and Sony Music. The Finding Mom's Killer podcast available on The Binge. So I'm going to bring on Steve Fishman in 1 second. I want to let you guys know, by the way, while we are doing this live and while we are discussing Steve's lengthy conversations with my father's going to call from prison. He doesn't know that we're live on air, of course, but we'll see what happens. So I'm going to turn the ringer on the phone, and this will probably happen in about 15 minutes. We'll hear a little bit from him, and then we'll dismiss him. And this should add to great fun. But on that note, Mover Nation, please welcome to the stage, or welcome to the show, Steve Fishman. Steve, what's going on, man?
Oh, good, Collier. As you can tell, it's cold in here. Well, I'm in New York, but
yes,
it's also, I'm just, styling.
Yeah, you're styling. Well, you said, can I wear a hat? And I thought you were going to pull out a ball cap that said Orbit or something. And then you pulled out this, what is that called, by the way? That's like the Russian hat that they wear, right?
Yeah, I think it's a Russian hat. My wife found it at a thrift store and immediately thought of herself. But I ended up with it. She has more hair than I do, so I needed it. We were in Canada at the time, which is where she's from. So,
which is a little colder than New York, I imagine.
Yeah, and much colder than California.
You know what, man? It's been cold and rainy. It's nice and sunny today, about 65, but it's going to be cold and rainy all week. And I'm very excited because I have to go to Florida twice now in the next couple of weeks. And I saw it was 85 degrees, and I'm very excited to go to Florida because I do not like cold weather. But yes, people saying they love the hat. So there you go. All right, man. So I guess let's get into Finding Mom's Killer, sort of how this whole thing came to be. Why don't you give your side of the tale to my audience? Let me know what let them know how it all came to pass.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me on, Collier. You and I met, as you mentioned, when I did a previous podcast, and we kind of got to talking backstage.
Yeah.
And you mentioned this kind of amazing story that has guided, shaped, and I suppose deformed your life in many ways.
Sure.
And I almost couldn't believe it, but of course you do a little Google and there it is. Suddenly for me, the idea of an 11-year-old, I apologize, the trailer seems to have gotten your age wrong, an 11-year-old solving a murder with the help of a local detective, but solving a murder that happened to be the murder of his mother seemed to just an incredible story. And then, getting to know you, it became multidimensional because I do love true crime, and Orbit Media does a bunch of true crime. Sony Music is part owner of the company, and they actually focus on true crime limited series, which is something we like to do. And we, you know, a lot of true crime has elements that are the same. You know, there's a dead body, there's a mystery, there's a case, there's a conflict, there's a cop. But we really like to do stories that have a dimension to them, a different dimension. And we really focus on characters. We really focus on, I like to think we really search for the heart of a story. You know, a lot of cop shows, a lot of true crime, they're essentially procedurals. You know, he did this and
Yeah.
then he did that, and then that happened, then this happened. But for me, the emotion of a piece is really what grounds it and guides it. And as I got to know this story and also got to know Collier, it was just very clear to me that this is a story about an emotional journey, and basically Collier's emotional journey, and an unimaginable journey. I mean, a set of circumstances that are kind of almost impossible to concoct, and that none of us, I'm sure none of your listeners have parallel experiences.
I should hope not.
Maybe I'm wrong, but yeah, I just assume not. But so it really becomes, and I think if you listen to the 6 episodes, Finding Mom's Killer, you can get it on Apple, on Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Sony has a subscription called The Binge. So if you want to subscribe, you can get it all episodes at once. Otherwise, it's one a week. I think tomorrow may be episode 3. One of the things that we really dug into is the emotional, not just the emotional toll, but the emotional relationships that Collier had. Because, you know, part of this story is very obviously that huge tragedy at the beginning of it. What happens to an 11-year-old with who loses a mother in the most horrible way. But a lot of the story really is what happens then. And Collier is effectively, well, orphaned. I mean, his
Yeah.
father's in prison, his mother is gone, and he is, I mean, Collier was quite an extraordinary 11-year-old, quite an extraordinary 12-year-old, and onward. I mean, the 11 and 12 is kind of where I focus, but you know, not only bright and really articulate and kind of crazily poised for somebody that young, but with a really kind of emotional, I don't know, stability almost in the face of just an onslaught. And so that became our way through the story.
Mhm.
I'll just mention a couple of things. You know, we started the story without knowing if we would be able to speak to his father. And obviously, Collier's father is a huge part of this story. He's a challenge as an interview subject because he's lied so much and so often over the years. So you don't really know how much to trust.
Yeah. That would be the understatement of the of the year, right?
Exactly. But you know, it's also 35 years later. People change, things change, the
Sure.
states are different. And I wanted to hear, and I think our, you know, listeners will want to hear, and you know, maybe Collier, you even were curious to hear what the old man had to say all these years later, because I know, well, according to your father, you guys hadn't actually really communicated for years.
No. No.
So hearing his voice, I don't even know if you've gotten to that episode 6 yet.
I have not gotten to episode 6. You know, when this came out, I had the flu, and it's so close to home, you know what I mean? And it's like when you're sick, it's like the last thing you want to hear is like really miserable shit, let alone when it happens to you. I made the mistake of also, when I was sleeping, watching apple cider vinegar. Not a good thing to watch when you're sick either. Uh, but yeah, but I have, as you know, because I had to as part of the podcast, initiate contact with him, you know, again, as we discussed. And, you know, we went back and forth about it. And then, as you know, as all that was going on, my uncle is, infirmed and then passes away, right? And so I've been sort of dealing with the aftermath of that. So it's been interesting. And I made a joke to his sister, my aunt Mimi. I said, she said, "Oh, now you're his pen pal." And I started getting letters again, which is a little something that I had grown accustomed to not getting, because they were always a way of, "Did you get my letters? Did you get my letters?" It was sort of like a control mechanism, which I realized. So I had to I've pawned those off on my PO box again, so those can just go to a different area, so I don't have to deal with them. Not that I check my mail very often, but it's just a little unnerving when you open the mailbox and I'm just like, oh, I was on the phone with a friend of mine the other day, and I was like, oh, yeah, okay, here it is in my mailbox. But anyways, it seems like from everything look, so many of my listeners, so many of my audience, not just here on YouTube, which is a very small number of people that are here, but on the audio podcast, and so many people have reached out to me and said, "Hey, we really loved the show. We loved the way that Steve put it together. They loved you as the narrator and telling the story in your way." But they're all very unnerved by things that my father said, for sure, which I still have yet to hear. I've heard a little bit. But talk to me a little bit about that challenging interview process with him.
Well, yeah, I'll tell you about that. I want to tell your listeners, viewers, that it's an especially complicated moment right this moment, because Collier's father is up for parole this year. He'll be 82 when he goes before the parole board. So despite longevity genes in the family, this could well be his last shot at parole. And true or not, certainly Collier's father believes it's true. Collier has a big say, a lot of influence, if he wants to have it. And so this is in some ways the kind of background to Jack, that's Collier's father's conversations. And I know it's in Collier's mind as well. And one of the things we really explored in the podcast was, how does somebody like Collier, or Collier, because there aren't too many people like Collier, how does he process this? How does he come to a point where he's got to decide, should my father, who killed my mother, be out of prison at age 82? A lot of factors involved, Some obviously have to do with the nature of the event, some with the passage of time, some with the connection of a father and son, no matter the pressures on that relationship.
Sure.
Some with, like real world considerations, like what happens to an 82-year-old when he enters the world 35 years after he exited it? That's something to think about as well. Anyhow, we do come to an answer in the podcast. I don't know if it's Collier's definitive answer, and my guess is he's still working on that. Are you there, Collier?
Oh yeah, I'm here. I just made you full screen just for the dramatic effect.
Oh, okay. So back to your question though about the interview. I wrote Collier's father, Jack, a letter. Took him a couple weeks, but he responded with interest, but without commitment. And Collier had been generous enough to share with me letters that he and his father had exchanged. So I knew something about their relationship. And one of the things I knew was that in whatever complicated way, and perhaps not his only agenda, but an agenda of his father seemed to be to really want to have contact with Collier. And I was in contact with Collier. So it seemed, I think, to him, Jack, that I might know something about Collier. Well, according to Jack, he hadn't had a response to an email in 16 years. They did exchange one email around Jack's 80th birthday, but it had been a long time since Collier and Jack had anything resembling a relationship.
Wait, he said 16 years?
He said 16 years since he's had a response to an email. He said you sent him an email for his 80th birthday and he responded, but you didn't respond to his response.
Well, that was when the system went down. But no, I mean, he and I made a murder in Mansfield like 6 years ago or whatever. So, yeah, no, it wouldn't 16 years. No, that would be that would not be true. But I did send him an email, but then that system, as you know, that's why we had to get back up on the new system with the GTL and all that nonsense. That JPay system went away. So, you know, that was sort of an issue there.
And I will say that, you know, once he engaged, he called me very often. And he certainly used me as an intermediary to reach out to Collier. He sent me photos from prison, and I scanned at least one of them and passed it along to Collier. You know, there were, you know, the whole relationship is so crazy fraught. And Jack has a couple of personalities, and one of them is that he would really like to be a father to Collier. So, you know, that one is kind of touching. Now, anybody who's listened to the podcast will know that there are frequently other personalities on display, but that one at least really liked the idea that I was in touch with Collier and could pass him a message. And he would say to me at the end of our conversations, he would say, okay, be sure to send Collier the photo and tell him I love him. And I don't know that I actually passed those words along, Collier. It seemed like that wasn't really my role. I wasn't a guy who really wanted to pressure you in that.
I think you did, though. I think you did tell me that, because I think we recorded that. I think you, if I remember correctly, you told me that. And look, and as I was telling somebody yesterday, they said, you know, does your father tell you he loves you? I said, yeah. And they said, well, you know, it's like got to be in his own, you know, his own weird way. I really do think he loves you. And I said, that's what my mother used to say. She said, your father loves you in his own sick, weird way. That's what my mother used to say in that last year of her life, when he was just being a real monster to us, as you know. And it was one of those things that, you know, I try to bear in mind when I speak with him. You know, it's been very odd, and I'm looking, it's 3, so it's almost 6:30 Eastern time there. That's usually the time he calls, because now, like I said, he was calling my uncle every Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and now he calls me because he gets these free phone calls. So it's just a
that's too much. You got to put some limits on it. You're good at that, though. But I mean, it was amazing to me because I was there for your first phone call.
Yeah.
You guys, I mean, it was suddenly he just brought you right back into the family.
There we go. Prison, jail.
Yeah. Well.
So this is what we do, by the way. So I hit accept, and then I record immediately.
The prepaid debit call from this
Jack
Boyle. An inmate at the Marion Correctional Institution. To accept this call, press 0. To refuse this call, hang up or press 1.
So what I'll do is I'll just say, hey, I'm here talking to Steve. We'll see how it goes.
This is a prepaid debit call. This call is from a DRC correctional facility and is subject to monitoring and recording. Utilization of an unapproved application and 3-way calls to communicate are strictly prohibited and a violation of DRC policy. Thank you for using GTL.
Thank you for using GTL. Of course. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Pop?
Good. We're good. What's your weather like?
It is sunny and warm, 65 degrees, but we are in for a cold snap, which will start tomorrow. We have lots of rain and lots of rain and lots of cold weather. So for the next week, it's going to be miserable.
Okay.
At least that's how I look at it, because I don't like cold weather or rain. So
yeah. What does my granddaughter say?
She does not like it either, so she will not be out. Yes, little Marisol will not be very pleased.
Okay.
So ironically, I'm just doing a Zoom call with Steve Fishman. You remember him, right?
Oh yeah, sure.
Steve, say hi.
Does that mean on a television set?
Yeah, over the internet.
Oh, okay. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Hi, Jack. Hi, Jack. It's good to hear your voice. Can you hear me?
Is that Steve? Hi.
Hi. Yeah, it's me. It's me. What's going?
Yeah. How you doing?
I'm just fine, actually. Just fine. What's?
Okay.
Yeah, no, things are good here. And how about with you? You maintaining? You're busy?
Yeah. In fact, ironically, before I called Collier, believe it or not, we got through on the first time. However, he and I have had the same problems you and I have had with the telephone. So it is. Anyhow, I was just looking through the calls, and the last time I spoke to you was 16 days ago. I just noticed it.
Oh, really? Yeah, we've fallen off. I've turned you over to Collier.
Yeah, it popped up. Well,
Yeah.
he's treating me okay. We're having a good time together.
Well, I know you wanted to reconnect, so I'm glad that happened.
Yeah. We thank you for being the matchmaker.
Well, hardly the matchmaker, but maybe I nudged along the bureaucracy just a bit.
He does have a hat on that could be a prop from Fiddler on the Roof, though. So
yeah, I forgot the Yiddish word for matchmaker. I forgot it. Jeez.
Yenta.
Oh wow.
Yenta or Yentel.
Well, Yenta is always a busybody. Yenta. Yentel was the guy in Fiddler on the Roof.
No, that was the woman.
Yenta is always.
And Reb Tevye was the main guy. But Pop, I have to finish with Steve, but I wanted to just get you guys to just say hi.
Okay. Well, as long as everything's okay, if anything comes up, Collier, make sure you send me a little email thing.
I will do that.
In case you hear it.
I spoke to Mary Ellen, so I have a lot to update you on, actually, with Charles.
Oh, okay. You want me to call later or something?
You can do that, sure.
What time is good for you now?
Another hour, 7:30 your time, okay. 7:45. 7:45.
7:45.
Yep.
We'll do.
All right.
Okay, we'll do.
All right. Love you.
Take care. Steve, I'll see you. Good talking to you.
You too. Take care.
Okay.
All right.
Love you. Love you. Okay. Bye.
You too. Bye-bye.
I just push the envelope as far as I can with the DRC, don't I?
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't know they'd let you record. They kept cutting me off when I recorded. What program are you using?
So it's, I mean, like, I can't give this. I will tell you that offline. How do they cut you off, though?
They literally did. The line just went dead.
So it's interesting because it's an interesting point because I'll just admit it. I've been recording every conversation with him, but sometimes I use a micro. Like for what we did is I would use the microphone, just like we did here. I would hold it up and I would record. I record a video with it, and then because that's how I was engaging with him. So I would record it that way. But then the iPhone records now. It just has to prompt you to do it. So what I do is when he calls in, I just say, whatever, like when it's saying recording, this call will be recorded. I just gonna start going blah 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 blah. So it doesn't hear it on the other line. Anyways, I mean, it's whatever. It may or may not work, but there has been times when I have been recording where it's just like stopped and I haven't heard him for like 2 minutes. So maybe that's the thing that happened with you. Because if you remember those first recordings that we did, that's what happened. So,
oh, interesting. Yeah, maybe I should have just stuck around.
Well, yeah, he comes back in or something like that. Yesterday, I had to hang up. I just hung up and he just called me back.
Right.
But, yeah. Anyways, there you go, audience. There you have it.
Seems like a nice guy, right?
Seems like a great, upstanding. Yes, very charming, very, ticks all the boxes, right? Laughing, affable. Oh yeah. It's been interesting. I had blood work done the other week and he had called me and, my father is a horrible human being. He was a fantastic doctor. So he called and he's like, what do you want to, he starts talking. I said, no, this is what we're going to talk about. You're going to read. I sent him all my blood labs and I read through them all. And I was like, you're going to be the doctor here. And you're going to tell me about all these things. Cause I got very concerned when my uncle, passed away all of a sudden and everything. So of course that my health was on the forefront of my mind and things like that. And I want to hear more about your experience with communicating with him. But right now I have his sister text messaging me, my Aunt Mimi. So my father's sister, who's the middle child. So my uncle who just passed away was the youngest. And she's now listening to the episodes and giving me her little notes from what she said. But I wanted to kind of talk to you a little bit about this. In episode 1 or 2, we got into the Vietnam stories, but did you get into those with him at all when you're interviewing him?
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to just go back 1 second.
Sure.
One of the things that struck me in your conversation with your father is that you signed off, love you, Dad. So what is that impulse? Is that how you feel?
Steve, this is like the last time I interviewed you. You turned the tables on me. You just can't help. You can't help yourself, can you?
I can't help myself, but that felt dramatic to me.
I mean, look, as I explained to you back then, like he's my father, right? So I do love him as my father, right?
Mm-hmm.
And part of me is it's nice to talk to him because I think for reasons that are very selfish for myself, and I think I'm allowed to be selfish in this situation, I like to get a little bit of a crystal ball and see where I might be 40 years from now. That's being generous. It's a little less than 40 years, but I like to see where I'm going to be, mentally, my clarity and all of that. So I think that for me, it was interesting to reconnect with him because it definitely feels like he hasn't missed a beat since the last time I spoke to him.
Okay. Can I now play reporter one step further?
Yep. Go ahead. Go for
it. That doesn't necessitate you to say, love you, Dad. So I think maybe there's also something else going on, which, yes, I agree. He's very mentally sharp and checking in on that for me would be reassuring too. But you seem ready and open to have another kind of relationship.
I mean, it's, what do I do at this point? Right. Like now I'm locked in. I try to, I'm going to, there's been weekends where I've been like, I can't talk to you. I'm going to have to do that more because sometimes it does get a little arduous. I'm trying to, part of it is, it's very interesting because, you and I have talked about some other things that I'd like to do with the story. There's a big, part of me that's very interested in, sort of the reverse role of, explaining things to him of like, this is what, This is what the world is like. Like he is asking me yesterday about like the phone, right? He sees it on television, but he doesn't understand what role these play in our lives nowadays, right? Like I'm like, yeah, I don't carry a wallet anymore. I use I pay for everything with the phone. It's connected to a credit card. It's connected to a bank. And he's like, well, what happens when you lose the phone or somebody steals your phone? It is like, well, it gets blacked up in the cloud. Well, what's that? Explaining the cloud, explaining this, I've been sending him to photos because it's very easy with the app. It's like just sending a text message. It's just, it has to get approved through. So I just send him stuff. So if I see something like, we have those Waymo self-driving cars around here that are self-driving taxis. So I send him lists like, this is a driverless car. I sent him this thing. It's a little Coco. It's a delivery robot that delivers food. Like this is how people get their food. This is a whole different world than what you left. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know. Like part of it is like, be prepared. Now, look, he's going to get, if he gets paroled, it's going to be to Ohio, which is not advanced like Los Angeles, I'm sorry to say. But, there's still a lot of things that have changed. And maybe part of me is like, I feel a responsibility to educate him. Like, this is the world you'll be stepping into.
Mm-hmm.
I also wrestle with, and I think we discussed this when we were talking on the burden. I also wrestle with the humanity of releasing prisoners who have been incarcerated for so long and then releasing them when they're as senior citizens into a world, Shawshank Redemption, also shot in Mansfield, Ohio. I think of the character Brooks from that film getting released, bagging groceries, talking about how the world, what does he say? The world went and got itself in a big damn hurry. It would have been incarcerated for 50 years, and just not able to, and ultimately, unfortunately, spoiler alert, but if you haven't seen Shawshank Redemption in 30 years has been out now, you're going to get spoiled. He hangs himself, in the halfway house. And, I think about things like that, and I have less sympathy for my father in that situation than I do for like other people who might be incarcerated for much lesser and much less and not heinous crimes. Somebody who stole a car, somebody who was convicted on, carrying a bag of weed in the 1970s, I think back to people who are, in marginalized communities or in minority communities who, grew up in circumstances where they didn't really have a shot, you know what I mean? And so turning to a life of crime was a way out for them. And then they get caught up in the cycle of the system, and the system doesn't ever provide them with the tools to be able to rejoin society. And this is a conversation for another day, but I struggle with that a lot in my own life with him. Like, how does this look? He talks to me about, I'm going to get a job. I'm going to get this. I'm just thinking to myself. And then he was saying to me, he goes, well, he's been having dialogue with his former cellmate who has been out in the world now for, I think he was released in, I want to say 2017, something like that. 2018, maybe earlier, but he's like, oh, he's doing all this stuff, and he has all these people that work for him from the Philippines. And I was like, yep, you can hire people on a thing called Fiverr. You can get them to do work, remedial work. It's the world has changed, so much. So I think that I sort of, I don't know why this is a self-imposed responsibility, right? Why I feel a duty to that. I guess just at the core of this, not to sound magnanimous or anything, but I guess I'm just my mother's son, Yeah. I have a capacity for that, Yeah. As he's making notes on his laptop.
Well, it's not just that I'm making notes on my laptop. I mean, I don't, there's sometimes I can enter this conversation, and then sometimes I just feel like our experiences of it are so different. I don't even feel like I have standing to kind of discuss it with you,
Well, what do you mean? What do you mean by that?
Well, here's a guy considering whether he should support his father's parole for murdering his mother. Is that like something that I or your listeners, viewers, I mean, can they say, what would I do? I mean, it's unimaginable. It's unimaginable. And I think that's what's so compelling and frightening and gripping about your situation, is that it's really something beyond. So, like, I agree with you. I completely agree with you that he may not be prepared. I mean, he does seem a little delusional that he could come out at 82 and find a job and support himself, which, I think actually probably ends up in some ways leading back to Collier, because what your father really needs is for a family member to step up and say, oh no, he's got a place to stay with me. Now, his brother, the person you've been mentioning, might have been that person, but he just passed within the last month. So he has a sister. I don't know that she's in a position to do it. I don't know that Collier.
They're moving out of Ohio. I think that's one of the reasons if he gets released, because he will be released to Ohio. He ain't moving in with me. That's for sure.
Yeah.
I can barely, where is my little? Oh, there she is. I can barely take care of myself and my Chihuahua, let alone another human, let alone that human being.
Yeah.
It's no, I'm in,
you know what Dave said? You haven't gotten to this part of the podcast yet, but I'll ruin it for you.
Sure.
Dave now is Lieutenant Dave Mesore, who was Collier's sidekick, or I guess maybe the other way around. But they partnered in the hunt for Collier's mother's killer. And I mean, obviously, Lieutenant Detective Mesore took the lead in that, but they were a team at a certain point, and then they became very close. Trying to think how much I should tell of this, but if anybody hasn't listened to it, I mean, I'll just say they became very close, and that very, very nearly became a kind of the most fundamental relationship in kind of certainly in Collier's life and maybe in Dave's. But one of the things that Lieutenant Mesore told me, and he was very generous with his time and tells, he tells the procedural story very well, is that he and Collier have talked over a long period of time. And when Collier was 12 and maybe then a little bit older, actually Dave said it went on and on, is, the question of his father's parole came up, after 20 years, after 30 years, and now after 35 years. And Collier, according to Dave, would occasionally say to Dave, do you think my father really killed my mother? And Dave, according to Dave again, would say, Collier, there was a trial and he was convicted, and I believe this. But the other thing that came up, according to Dave, is that Dave said that at some point you wondered, and maybe it was just a thought experiment, but you wondered, if you should volunteer at some point to have your father live with you. And Dave's point of view, of course, was, Collier, no, because he'll kill you.
Yes. Yeah. That would be a thought experiment. That would be not a real experiment. That'd be a thought experiment. I think as you know, you talk to Dave, he has strong feelings about that, about my safety with my father, if I was to be in that situation, what that would look like. And it's and I would be remiss if I said I didn't share his concerns. I think for me, and again, spoiler alert on some of this stuff, but one of the things that I know that was in the episodes when he's talking about, burying my mother's body, right? And he tells you a story, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but he tells you a story about how my mother came down in just her panties on the night that she was killed. And they had this confrontation downstairs, because he tells the story very much as he does in A Murder in Mansfield, right?
Yeah. Oh, did he say that in A Murder in Mansfield?
Yeah, he didn't say the thing about coming down in her panties, but he said she came down and was hollering at me, Jack, 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 which is, to me, is, obviously not the truth.
Yeah.
I heard it happen. I think for the, it's interesting that Dave said that about me questioning my father's guilt. And and to answer your journalistic question, there was a very long period of time where off and on, I questioned that. It was less of the fact that I questioned it like, oh, did it happen or not? It was more of a scenario where I was questioning, I'm not capable of such a thing. So could this really be true? Because if I'm his son, and let's keep it real, I have, since I was 11 years old, lived under a stigma of the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. The could you do this too? The warning signs from, I've been in relationships, and even recently in a relationship, you met the girl, where even that was used as weaponized against me in a way. Well, your father did this, and I just was like, you gotta be fucking kidding me. You know what I mean? Like, I haven't heard this, and this is what you're going to choose to weaponize. Okay. All right. I think that, I've lived under that stigma. And I think that when I was questioning that at the time, and I remember even asking my adopted parents about this around the time that he was first up for parole in 2010, like, did this really happen? Like, could there have been somebody involved? Like, because it was just so hard for me to wrap my head around as I was becoming a man, right? A young man in the world saying, I can't, there are very specific and nuanced scenarios where I can imagine taking somewhere. I can imagine having so much hatred or anger in my life to take another human being's life. There are two probably very specific circumstances. One was if I had a child or somebody hurt or sexually attacked one of my my nephews or my child, I would have a hard time restraining myself, probably. Or obviously in a self-defense survival scenario where it's the knife in the mud type of scenario, and you're fighting for that, sure. But that's it. I can't imagine the rage, the anger, the premeditation side of this is probably the thing that I have the hardest time with, is this concept of preparing, getting the jackhammer, things like that. And how did he explain that to you when you were interviewing him?
He said that those were happenstances. The jackhammer, he said, and the stupid jackhammer was in the car because, he planned to do these home repairs over the holiday weekend. This all takes place over New Year's and weekend, 1989. And so he said that's why he had the jackhammer. And, listen, there's this friend of his who was supposedly, and even testified that he was planning in some vague way to do these home repairs with Jack. As for the tarp, he said that was on your back porch. And then listen, I mean, I don't know how much you want to get into this because,
No, let's get into it. That's why we're here.
well, so he buries Noreen's body in the basement of his new home in Erie, which he'd bought 2 weeks prior. And he takes the jackhammer, he jackhammers up the basement floor. He digs out with a shovel some of the dirt, places her body in the grave that he's dug, and then kind of pushes the rocks or the debris back into the grave. And he will eventually buy some quick drying concrete and put that over it, and will eventually buy some astroturf to put over that, and eventually hire somebody to build shelves to put on the astroturf. But for a guy you'd have to assume has some smarts, it just doesn't seem like a mastermind plan to not have those things on hand. And then, listen, he does the jackhammer. He pays for it with a personal check and gives his driver's license as ID. I mean, is he a mastermind? He's a murderer. There's no doubt about that. And there's a sickness to it, to burying the body in his basement. And I mean, there are two other things there. One is, okay, you do that, and then what do? You just walk through life as if nothing had happened? And as far as I can tell, that's what he did. I asked him if his girlfriend at the time, Sherry Campbell, noticed anything different about him after he killed and murdered and buried this woman. And Jack said, no, I must have put a front on. I mean, there's this moment in the trial where the prosecutor asks Jack on the stand, says, well, you don't really wear your emotions on your sleeve, do you? I think the prosecutor's trying to get at the fact that Jack's kind of cold-blooded.
Mm.
And Jack turns and looks at the jury and he says, I'm a normal human being just like you. I have emotions. And, when he told me that his girlfriend, fiance, the mother of his child, didn't notice any difference in him, I just thought, Jack, I don't think you're normal like the rest of us. There may be some scale on what you're normal, but not like the rest of us. Listen, the other thing, and again, I never know how much to tell, but I talked to medical examiners. We got a hold of the autopsy.
Yeah.
I wanted to understand it better. I talked to medical examiners. Jack killed Noreen, and then he says he killed Noreen and then put a plastic bag over her head because he didn't want to look at her.
Yep.
Now, the medical examiner, both the one who did the autopsy initially and the expert that I spoke to, said the blunt force trauma to her head was not enough to kill her. What actually killed her was the plastic bag over her head. Did you know that, Collier?
No.
Well, I'm sorry to be breaking that to you on
live on YouTube on my podcast. I mean, yeah, I mean, I knew she had suffocated, but it's yeah.
Yeah, I mean, getting into the details of it,
it's it's I can remember there was a movie that came out around 2002 with Susan Sarandon and now Oscar-winning actor Kieran Culkin, and there's a scene where she's suffocated with a plastic bag over her head. I remember watching this movie with a girlfriend at the time. And I was like, I can't watch this. I can't watch this. And they're like, why? They didn't understand. And then I had to just explain, like, okay, this is why I can't watch this scene, right? This is very emotional for me. And then they were mortified, because they didn't know the story either. And they were, mortified for having put me through that. But nothing adds up with him, right? And I feel like it's the deflect. It's not even blame. It's deflect and dodge. And I can make it a little better. I can make it a little easier if I just tell another white lie, But it's not. It doesn't change things. It doesn't bring back my mother. It doesn't do any of that. It doesn't get him out of prison.
No. I mean, it doesn't seem real to me that it could have happened as he says it is. In other words, he just pushed her.
Yeah.
She fell and hit her head. She's unconscious. He says he does CPR on her.
Yeah.
He's a doctor. He says he does CPR on her. But that she's dead.
Yeah.
And yet the autopsy and the guy who reviewed the autopsy said she wouldn't have died from the blow to the head. So how does a doctor miss that? Listeners to the podcast should make their own judgments about that. I mean, I can't believe that there was just, there wasn't something else going on.
Yeah. No, I agree. My guest today is Steve Fishman from Orbit Media. He is the executive producer, host of Finding Mom's Killer, available on Sony Music Entertainment.
Well, it's available on wherever you get your podcast.
Wherever you get your podcast from Sony Music.
Yeah.
But available wherever you get your podcast from. We are discussing the behind the scenes of making the podcast. As it intertwines with my own story, which is basically the podcast. So
yes, Collier's the hero.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you to say that. Just a kid who loved his mom. That's it. A curious kid for sure. Still that curious kid, just a little older. So, talk to me about, you got to know Dave Mesore, Lieutenant Mesore, through this, and sort of your experience with the law enforcement side of this and the work that he did.
Dave is, he's an interesting character because you'll hear in the podcast, he speaks, he's 81 years old now. So I think he may have spoken a little bit more vibrantly when he was in his 40s, but he's very even-tempered. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't really get emotional. As Collier, I remember you described to me when Dave found something alarming, he would say, that would be the way he registered something.
Yeah.
That you or I might say, "Oh my God!" So, like a little bit of our challenge with Dave in terms of storytelling was, this is a guy who's at the center of this case and solves it and really persists, despite opposition within his police department. The police department superiors are thinking, a prominent doctor is going to kill his wife and bury her in his basement. Are you going to embarrass the police department? And Dave is the kind of guy who kind of doesn't back down. And so despite this mild-mannered aspect, this, conservative, good, church-going family man kind of aura, he's a kind of a quiet badass. And I hope that comes across in the podcast. Collier was very lucky to team with this guy. And I mean, I will say that, for this extraordinary 11-year-old that Collier was, sure, there was a lot of chance involved, but, Collier pretty quickly understood that Dave was the guy and latched on to him. And then Dave really became very emotionally attached to Collier. The first title of the podcast was "Me and Dave Against the World."
Yeah.
A phrase that Collier had used with me that I liked a lot.
Yeah, and that was we had talked about that. You said, what was that? And I said, yeah, it was me and Dave against the world. And the interesting thing is I got to fix my hair because I can't put a furry hat on. One of the things I didn't realize at the time, and Dave told me the last time I was in Mansfield, so it was the end of 2023. I'm going back in like a month, so I'll see him and all my Mansfield peeps. So check me out when I come to Mansfield. But I was unaware that the level of scrutiny, I knew it was within the police department, but I didn't know that James Mayer Jr., who was a prosecutor, did not also want to take the case and was telling Dave, look, I'm not going after this guy. He's a doctor. And really how it really was me and Dave against the world,
Yeah. Yeah, but the Sony marketing department got involved and said, "Oh no, Finding Mom's Killer. We like that." People
A Murder in Mansfield was originally called Aftermath. Yeah. So we got Henry Schleif, who ran the network at that time, said, "No, A Murder in Mansfield," which at the end of the day, it's probably a better title for what they were going for. But
I still don't like Finding Mom's Killer, but it is memorable. I hope you listeners will remember it and go there. One of the things that we talk about with Dave is when he was a younger cop, he really enjoyed being a patrolman, and there seemed to be like a certain kind of physical aspects of the job that Dave kind of enjoyed. He told this story about being at a YMCA, but which rents rooms, and there was a pretty disturbed kid who had a knife and was backed against a wall, and cops were there, and he wouldn't put the knife down, and they had their guns drawn, and Dave shows up as the officer in charge, and he says to some other cop, he said, "Well, just get a mattress and we'll rush him." So this guy grabs a mattress, and I imagine holding it chest high, and they run at this guy, and the guy actually cuts the other cop. And Dave just says, "I knocked him out with my blackjack." And then the next day or two, so this guy was a kid, and I guess mentally disturbed, and the kid's parents come into the police department to complain about Dave's treatment. And Dave's called into the captain's office with the parents there. And the captain says to him, "Well, what do you have to say for yourself? You knocked this kid out." And Dave's answer, according to Dave, was, and in my mind, he looks at the parents right then, and he says, "He's lucky I didn't shoot him." So that's big. But, I mean, for me, I go back to, the Collier Landry of it all. There's this amazing episode 5, which is largely based on letters between Collier and his father. And as mentioned, Collier generously let us read a bunch of the letters, copy a bunch of the letters. So you kind of live this in real time with Collier 13, 14, maybe 15 years old, writing to his father and his father writing back. And Collier's like an amazingly generous kid and, very sincere and very generous, with his father, who, by the way, at this point is still maintaining that he's innocent, that he was framed, that he has no idea who killed Noreen. And at one point, the father, Jack, writes back this 8-page, single-spaced letter that's just, it's so mean.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you remember that letter, Collier.
Oh, yeah. No, I remember a lot of them. And talk to me about how we got into the vocal inflections of a younger Collier reading these letters.
Oh, yeah, I love this. We all hate AI because it's the end of the world and the end of creative enterprise.
Yeah.
But, when you have an 11-year-old that you're trying to put people in the mind of, but that 11-year-old is now 47, you can't.
You got to age me every time you do it. You got to do it.
You're 46. Didn't you just have a birthday?
We don't discuss my age. You don't. I decided I'm going to be like my mother and start to age in reverse. I didn't know how old she was until I read her obituary years later.
Hey, I feel that same way. But let's just say you had a prepubescent or a pubescent, high-voiced.
I could talk like this now, though, so I could say, "Dear Collier, you are no longer a part of our family. We do not recognize you as our family anymore. Your unctuous, bratty behavior at trial has made us discard you from the family."
Yeah, there you go.
Wow.
It's pretty good, right?
You remember that letter?
I do remember a little bit. Yeah, it was things like, "You unctuous brat, we no longer consider you a part of our family." It's all the things. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah,
that was in there, and it was, it was a weird letter because
very strange.
Who says unctuous brat? That's crazy.
It's a $10 word for sure.
It's a $10 word that seems so out of place for so many reasons, but
it's anachronistic.
Yeah. There's a good $10 word too. We got in partnership or had a favor done by this quite good AI company, which is able to take a voice and through the AI programming, basically clone that voice and have it say whatever you want to say. So we put a half an hour of Collier talking on the stand, the witness stand, as an 11-year-old. We entered that into this program, and then we gave this program Collier's letter to read. And the AI voice, I actually think it's really an emotional, captures the emotion of it. We did the same with Jack, his father. I think that voice is less compelling, but it's a really good alternative to, a lot of times you hire actors and then they read the stuff, but actors, it's not like you're getting Oscar winners to read reading the letter, at the price point we're able to pay. So
this is true.
So I thought AI. I mean, I'd love to hear what listeners think. Episode 5, Finding Mom's Killer.
Available wherever you get your podcast from. Apple,
Right,
Spotify.
to go soon, right? I do. Yeah.
All the things. Yeah, you got to go soon. Steve, anything you want to share with anything else you want to share with my listeners regarding the show, what you've got going on next for Orbit? Are we going to make a movie, a television series? What are we doing?
Let's do it. I mean, one of my co-founders is Fisher Stevens. Some people may be familiar with his name. He was an actor in Succession, and he just directed and won a Directors Guild Award for his documentary.
PGA Award, right?
Yeah.
Well. Yeah.
For Beckham, his documentary. Executive producer of Tiger King. I mean, he's like and he won an Oscar for a documentary, that too. Yeah. Anyhow, he's a co-founder, and he's got his own production company, and we at Orbit did a deal with his production company, and he loves the podcast, so he's developing it and getting it ready to go out to people who might like to fund a movie. Actually, I think it's a TV show. Maybe it's a movie. I don't know. Anyhow, I'll let them decide. But hopefully that happens. We're got a couple of more podcasts in the pipeline. I would love for listeners to visit our feed. The Burden is our flagship podcast. That's how Collier and I met. We now have a feed. The feed itself is called The Burden, and we've got 2 other podcasts in it. It's true crime. The Burden was just nominated for an Ambie, which is the Oscars of the podcast industry. And so that's kind of thrilling. It's really good. That one, was deeply reported. Took us 4 years to do. And we followed that up with Empire on Blood, which is also in the feed. And there's a third one called Avenger. Actually, that was just the subject of a 60-minute segment. But I think that your listeners will really enjoy those if they, like what we're doing here. There's terrific storytelling, and it is true crime. And I guess the last thing I'd leave you with is, what happened to Collier is really unimaginable. And I hope that the podcast captures some of the kind of extraordinary aspect of Collier, in particular as a young person, but somebody who goes through this and is a very successful kid. I mean, comes out as president of his class for 2 straight years, has an ability to be social and interact with people. And yeah, I think he has his share of therapy, but, to kind of be that strong as a kid and that have those kind of inner resources as a kid, I think it's extraordinary. And it's extraordinary in addition because it doesn't end. They find that his dad is the killer, his dad's convicted, but then where does Collier live? What happens to Collier now? I mean, there are a number of things that come in and try this young man. And, Collier stands up to the test. I mean, who knows? I guess Collier will have to look back at some point and tell us how it affected a guy who's 42, you said?
Yeah.
But I think that one of the things that listeners will take away from the podcast is they will just feel for this kid. And Collier, I really thank you for sharing this story with us. I know you've told it before, but I think we probably put you through a lot nonetheless, and you were really generous with your time and your emotions.
Well, thank you. It was my pleasure. Steve Fishman, thank you so much for joining the program. Thanks for being generous with your time with my audience today. Where can my listeners find you?
Well, you can always I'd love for you guys to check out the webpage at orbitmedia.fm. For any Orbit Media questions, info@orbitmedia.fm, and that'll always get to me.
Fantastic. Steve Fishman, I appreciate your time. Thank you for joining the program. One last thing, because this program was originally called Moving Past Murder. There's Moving Past Trauma. Now it's just the Collier Landry Show because it's easier. But I refer to my audience as Mover Nation. And I always try to give them one last little tidbit on how they can move past something traumatic in their life, or how they can deal, or a sort of growth strategy of just like, hey, this is how you can apply resilience or strength to your own life. And in your very vast career of telling very harrowing stories, what's one little tidbit you want to offer my audience?
Well, I'll actually offer it from my own life. I didn't suffer the trauma, certainly not the worst of this, but I went through a very, let's say, messy divorce, and had quite young kids at that time. And so they ended up, kind of having a front row seat. So it wasn't easy. But one of the things that it led me to do is I really dug into the literature about what happens to kids and of divorce. And the kind of general impression is that it ruins a kid, and they're damaged in X and Y ways. And I'm sure that's true. It certainly presents challenges to a kid. But, there's a lot of research about resilience. And one of the things that kind of has bubbled up but hasn't gotten a lot of attention in the literature about children of divorce is that those who cope in many ways end up stronger, in many ways end up more self-sufficient, more self-confident, more independent than their peers. I want to believe that's true. I think in my own kids, it may be true. But, for people who go through trauma, I would never pretend to expect or demand or urge or even pretend to have any knowledge about what you should do. I'll just say that, being close to that particular experience, I was really heartened to hear and to read that all things are possible. All things are possible, not only damage.
I think that's beautiful, and a beautiful way to end the show. Steve Fishman, thank you so much for your time and sharing that with our audience. I think that's beautiful. Thank you.
Hey, Collier. Well, thanks for having me. I know we'll talk again soon.
You got it. I will have all of Steve's links in the show notes of today's episode. Mover Nation. So we have a couple of things. Normally we do our Collier's AV Club. It's usually the second Sunday of every month. However, because of the way February was and way March is, today's the 9th. We're not even into double digits yet. I always like to do it on a double digit day. So we are going to have Collier's AV Club next Sunday. We're going to have it next Sunday. I don't know what we're going to do. And we're bumping up the time to 3 p.m. Eastern time, which is noon here in California. I have some evening commitments now on Sundays. We're still going to do our lives on Sunday, but we're going to do our AV Club earlier in the day versus later. We used to do this at 8 p.m. Eastern. So I'm hoping you can join me. That is available for all channel members, Patreon supporters here on YouTube, on Patreon. I'll put the link behind the paywall for all of you guys. It's great. We get to watch documentaries, shows, whatever. I don't know what we're going to see this week, but I'm going to figure it out during the week, and I'll post about it so you guys can check it out. So I appreciate it. Since last week was my birthday, some gifts have still began to trickle in, and here's Mesore. She is next to her little ducky, which was a gift for my birthday. Her little pink ducky, which she loves so much. But Cat Loves Catskills, Kathleen Welsh, who is here, who is one of our generous moderators, generous with her time. And she sent me something. And this is I got some wonderful gifts last weekend, which we opened on my birthday, which was last Friday. Again, last birthday of my 30s. So this is from Kathleen, and it's something silly. Oh, no way. Oh, wow. Okay. She said, I sent you something very silly and goofy. All right. Look at this. It's hard to see with the wrapping. Okay. All right. I'll be a polite. I love little tchotchkes. I was into robots as a kid. Oh, look at this. This is so. And she got me my favorite skinny dipped almonds. These are low in sugar. Skinny dipped. You should be a sponsor of the show. I love your snacks. Low sugar. Actually made with allulose, and this is a cool little robot car toy thing. I love my little tchotchkes. Thank you so much, Kathleen Welsh, and of course a card, which is very sweet, which I will of course read. Hopefully it won't be too schmaltzy, but it is. What is that? That's the Peanuts. That's the bird from Peanuts. What was the bird? I'm trying to get it focused for you guys here to see. Marisol, you're just, there we go. That's so cute. The little bird from Peanuts, which I cannot remember. Collier, just a little bird song in honor of your birthday. Just wanted to send you something fun and silly for your birthday. Happy birthday, love, Kathleen. Thank you so much, Kathleen. Cat loves Catskills. You guys are amazing. Marisol's going to take a little nap now. Mover Nation, I hope you guys enjoyed today's program. Please check out Finding Mom's Killer on wherever you get your podcasts from. The new podcast from Orbit Media and Sony Music Entertainment, featuring yours truly. My guest today was Steve Fishman from Orbit Media, and we had a great chat. And I hope that you guys liked that, enjoyed that in the program. And we got to hear from my father live on the phone as well. I hope that you guys take away something from the program. And look, I'm at the very tail end of my sort of experience here with telling my story, because I've talked about it a lot on this show. I've talked about it here on the YouTube platform. I know you guys are interested in it, but it's time to sort of refocus this program back to what I think is the most important, which is the moving on process of this. I shared last year, we did, I made my film, A Murder in Mansfield, which you can purchase here on the channel. You can purchase it on my website through my store. You can get it on Amazon, wherever you get it's on Hulu, I'm sure, as well. Discovery Plus. But I shared my story last year on, we did A Plan to Kill on Oxygen. I'm on Soft White Underbelly, the huge YouTube channel, obviously sharing it on this podcast. I've been interviewed numerous times by the BBC and other publications about my story, but it's time to sort of, as we head into today is, daylight savings time is upon us. It is, as I like to say, it's the most wonderful time of the year. For me, I love the summer. And as we head into this, and as we look towards having more daylight in the world and in our lives, let's have that ethereal daylight as well, because it's time to shed light on the process of what happens after all this bad stuff. I know that doesn't fit the true crime genre or the mold. That's why I'm not in it. And that I want this to be a place where you come and you hear an inspiring story, how all this works, how this affects my life and my relationships, how this affects my outlook on life. These are all things that I love to share with you guys, but that I want to share more of and less of all the bad stuff, more of the positive stuff, because that's really how I live my life. That's really how all of this, how I've gotten through all this trauma. And this is the stuff that I think my audience, that you guys benefit the most from hearing from me, is all those positive ways of how I moved past all of this. That's why this is Mover Nation. So again, I appreciate you guys being on this journey. We're going to start to close this chapter up, though, as I said, and get into some more fun stuff. As you know, I'm a filmmaker. As you know, I'm a musician. As you know, I'm a big mental health and wellness guy. And time to devote more time to those types of stories and less about, the headlines of the true crime world. So I'm looking forward to really expanding this program in a way this summer that you guys can really appreciate. And as we get into the rest of 2025 and beyond. And I thank you guys so much. I'm so grateful for you all being here. And, as I say, we always keep it moving. As I always say at the end of the show, guys, we are all really lucky to be here. Let's keep it, let's keep in our hearts that, we can choose to look at life, always look at the bright side. I'm a glass half full guy. I'm a perpetual optimist despite my circumstances, despite what I've been through. That's how I choose to. That's the lens in which I frame my life. To use my cinematography jargon, it's the lens in which I use to frame my life is through optimism and hope. And no matter what your take is on what's going on in the world, we can choose to look at it through that lens versus a lens of despair. And kindness is something that I think that we all need to really focus on. Not only kindness towards others, but kindness towards ourselves. Give ourselves a little bit of slack. We're all doing the best we can. On that note, I'm Collier Landry. I'll see y'all on the next one. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to support today's program, please click the links in the description of the show notes of today's episode. And if you like this video, check out this one right here or this one right here. And don't forget to like and subscribe because it helps with the algorithm. On that note, I'm Collier Landry. I'll see y'all on the next one. Good girl, Marisol. Good girl.